Now, to get to the bottom of how and what happened, I'm joined now by, down the line, by former NATO and Royal Navy Commander Rear Admiral Chris Parry and Civil and Structural Engineer Julian Carter. Julian, perhaps I can start with you in terms of the integrity of a bridge. Has design changed much? Could this happen to any other bridge? Were a big vessel like this to go into it?
It all depends about where. What you've got is a very lightweight structure, has got incredibly large spans at 800 meters. And the ship, well, what that means for the structure, every little bit is connected from one side to the other. And what's happened as we see the ship collide, it's what we call a continuous structure across its supports. And it's hit the bridge right on one of the piers. And effectively, where it wants to be joined together at the pier, it's sliced through that joint. It's hit the pier. What we can't see is it will have pushed it towards us in that perspective and changed the axis that it sits on. So it would have put a twist into it straight away. And unfortunately, this kind of structure, what we call redundancy, it just does not have the redundancy to sustain hits like that because it's light, it's a long span, and they snap.
OK, so if something like that happens, and we talk about repair, we talk about the importance of such a structure, how long is it going to take for some kind of repair job?
You won't be repairing that.
So it's a complete change, a complete rebuild.
When you look, you'd have to do an assessment of every item and then decide where the failure points could be. For any engineer to do that with the level of accuracy required to put their professional indemnity against it wouldn't happen, would not happen. It would be a whole new structure, I would say.
Maybe I can come to you, Chris, now and just talk about how on earth can an accident like this happen? We hear that perhaps power was lost in this vessel. Presumably, if that happens, you have no control. If it's got some momentum, it's going to go in whichever direction it's going.
Yeah, thank you. I must admit, I've looked at it a number of times, and one of the things that strikes me is you see a burst of sort of smoke coming out of the funnel just before the impact, which suggests they tried to get the engines going again. We don't know yet whether it's a control failure of the steering or the main engines themselves. But the trouble is with these things, as you say, you can see how big this thing is. It's 110,000 tons. It's got all those containers on it, and if you've got a loss of power, you can't actually get it back. It's going to be subject to essentially the wind and the tide. What I'm surprised about is that they didn't drop an anchor and actually try and slow the ship down. I suspect it's a function of not having that many people on board. The other thing that I think the authorities will be keen to know is the evidence from the two pilots who were on board. This ship was not just being if you like, navigated by the master. It had two Port of Baltimore pilots on board, so their testimony is going to be really interesting. But I must say that I've been in situations like this where you have what I call a river port. You've got obviously the tidal stream flowing in or out. It looks like it's flowing out here. If you do have a power failure, that 110,000 tons is going to move pretty fast and very powerfully against anything it hits. What I find interesting is that a similar ship to that, well, in fact, that ship itself had a similar incident in Antwerp in 2016, where it had a steerage problem in that case, I think. But Antwerp, again, is a very fast-flowing river where if you get into trouble, you're going to be pushed very, very quickly up or downstream.
I was actually going to ask you about that incident in terms of whether they've got form, perhaps. But maybe I could just ask you, though, about how difficult is it for us lay people who look at these boats and ships and think, good Lord, they're absolutely enormous. How on earth do you control them? How difficult is it to navigate them, particularly through structures such as bridges?
Oh, it should be pretty easy. You stick to the track, you know what the tidal stream is and what the windage is. And as long as you've got power on the vessel, you can steer. The problem is once you lose power, you haven't got a flow over the rudders, and then the rudders are inoperable. And as I said, it's then the tidal stream that takes over. And I don't have to tell anybody here how many newtons of force something going at, say, 10 miles an hour and 110,000 tons, when it hits something, you can see the result.
Now, when it comes to things like investigation, what are the processes that are now going to be gone through?
Well, I mean, the American Transportation Authority will have a look at this. We have a similar system here in the United Kingdom. They'll look at all the circumstances. They'll see what went wrong. They'll try and learn lessons from it. But I mean, the simple lesson is, the sea is always out to get you. And if you allow any margin to have a go at you, it will.